Outpost Vila smelled like ozone and broken dreams. Cale Durant had made peace with this approximately 4 months into his assignment. Around the same time, he'd accepted that the coffee dispenser had achieved malevolent sentience and was waging a personal campaign against his taste buds. The station clung to the edge of charted space like a particularly stubborn barnacle, serving as a waypoint for ships that couldn't afford better routes and personnel who couldn't afford better prospects. Cale fit firmly in the second category. He was an engineer, competent enough to keep ancient systems running with duct tape and profanity, unremarkable enough to blend into bulkheads. He'd perfected the art of being professionally invisible, which suited him fine. Invisible people didn't get asked to attend diplomatic functions or explain why the waste reclamation system was making concerning noises. Tonight found him elbow-deep in a docking clamp mechanism that had decided 20 years of service was enough, and it deserved retirement. The clamp disagreed with his assessment and was expressing its feelings through strategic hydraulic fluid leaks. Cale had named it Gerald. Gerald was being difficult. You need the torque amplifier. Cale glanced up to find Jara standing beside his workspace, holding the exact tool he'd been about to ask for. This happened often enough that he'd stopped being surprised by it. They developed the kind of working relationship that operated mostly through tool passing and comfortable silence. Jara was Valier, which meant she stood nearly 7 feet tall, moved with the kind of fluid precision that made human coordination look like a first draft, and had skin that shifted between shades of violet and midnight blue depending on her emotional state. Her ears swept back from her skull in elegant curves, far longer than human ears, capable of independent movement that Cale found endlessly fascinating in the way you find things fascinating when you're trying very hard not to stare. "Thanks," he said, taking the amplifier. "How'd you know? You always need it for the docking clamps. You also always forget to bring it." Her voice carried an accent that turned certain human phonemes into something musical. "I've started bringing 2 of everything when you're working on Gerald. I don't always forget. You forgot yesterday and last week, and..." "Okay, I always forget. Point made." Cale fitted the amplifier to the stubborn bolt. "But in my defense, Gerald is a nightmare of outdated engineering held together by spite. Gerald is a machine. Machines don't have spite. Gerald absolutely has spite. I think it's planning something." Jara made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been exasperation. With her species, the distinction was subtle. She moved to the adjacent workstation and began running diagnostics on the power distribution system, falling into their established rhythm. Cale focused on convincing Gerald that hydraulic fluid belonged inside the mechanism, not decorating the deck plating. They'd worked together for 6 months. Long enough for Cale to learn that Jara took her coffee with enough sugar to achieve sentience, that she hummed while she worked, low, thrumming sounds that resonated in frequencies just below human hearing, and that she was probably the most competent technician on the station, human or otherwise. Not long enough for Cale to understand why she sometimes watched the human crew members with an expression that made his chest feel tight. The station's PA system crackled to life with a sound like reality clearing its throat. Transport ship Meridian has docked at Bay 3. All personnel are reminded that diplomatic courtesies are mandatory and violence is strongly discouraged. "That's oddly specific," Cale muttered. "There was an incident last month," Jara said without looking up from her diagnostic panel. "Ambassador from Krell Prime insulted someone's home colony. Medical Bay ran out of burn treatment supplies. Did the ambassador survive?" "Barely. The other person received a formal reprimand and a bonus." "I like this station's priorities." The docking bay doors opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. A group emerged from the transport, human diplomats, judging by their uniforms and the calculated way they moved, like people who'd practiced walking into rooms. Cale recognized the type. He'd gone to university with people like this, the ones who seemed to navigate social situations with the ease that Cale reserved for mathematical proofs. Ambassador Chen led the group. Kale had seen her file during the pre-arrival briefing he'd been required to attend. Decorated diplomat, expert in frontier negotiations, owner of cheekbones that could cut glass. She moved through the docking bay like she owned it, which she probably did in some legal sense Kale didn't understand. Beside him, Jara's skin shifted to a darker shade of purple. The diplomats passed their workstation, trailing perfume and self-assurance. Ambassador Chen glanced at them briefly, the kind of look that cataloged and dismissed in the same motion, before continuing toward the station commander's office. Her entourage followed like planets in orbital formation. Kale turned back to Gerald, who was still leaking in protest. He was reaching for a seal patch when he realized Jara had stopped working. She stood perfectly still, staring at her diagnostic panel without seeing it, her skin now deep violet edging toward indigo. "You okay?" Kale asked. Jara didn't respond immediately. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet he almost missed it beneath Gerald's hydraulic complaints. "I'm not beautiful like human women." The words landed in the space between them like something fragile and sharp. Kale's hand froze halfway to the seal patch. His brain, that magnificent organ responsible for engineering solutions and terrible jokes, decided this was an excellent time to completely shut down. Jara's skin had gone full indigo, cycling through shades that Kale had learned meant distress or embarrassment or both. She still wasn't looking at him. Kale set down his tools very carefully, buying himself 3 seconds to organize thoughts that felt too large for his vocabulary. This was well outside his operational parameters. He fixed machines. Machines didn't have feelings about beauty standards across species lines. Machines were blessedly simple. But Jara was standing there, shoulders tense, probably regretting having said anything, and Kale's options were limited to either responding or pretending he hadn't heard, which would make him officially the worst friend in 2 solar systems. He took a breath, turned to face her properly, and smiled, not his usual tired half-smirk but something genuine that felt uncomfortable on his face. "You've got 2 big things they don't," he said. Jara's expression shifted through confusion to something that might have been hurt, and Kale realized with mounting horror that she thought he was making a crude, anatomical joke. His brain, having failed him once, decided to fail him again by temporarily forgetting how to produce words. "I meant—" He waved his hands frantically, trying to physically demonstrate sincerity. "That came out wrong, very wrong. I meant courage and heart. You've got courage and heart. 2 big things that they don't. Human women, not that they don't have courage or hearts, obviously they do, but you, specifically you, have extraordinary amounts of both, and that's what I meant. Not anything else." He was absolutely going to die of mortification. Gerald was going to leak hydraulic fluid until Kale drowned in a combination of mechanical failure and social incompetence. Jara was staring at him. Her skin had shifted to a lighter purple, which might have been a good sign or might have been preparation for filing a formal complaint. "Courage and heart," she repeated slowly. "Yeah." Kale's face felt like it was generating enough heat to power the station. "Those 2 things, which you have, in impressive quantities, making you beautiful, in a way that has nothing to do with physical attributes." He was fairly certain he'd just set a record for most awkward, sincere compliment in human history. But Jara's skin was lightening further, cycling toward shades of violet blue that might have been curiosity, or might have been something else entirely. She tilted her head slightly, ears adjusting to focus on him with the kind of attention that made Kale feel simultaneously seen, and like he wanted to hide behind Gerald. "Explain," she said. Kale rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he'd never managed to break despite years of evidence that it made him look even more awkward than usual. Gerald chose this moment to emit a particularly judgmental hiss of hydraulic pressure. Even the machinery was against him. "Okay," he said, organizing his thoughts with the same care he used for complex repair sequences. "Remember 3 months ago when the primary cooling system failed in Sector 7? Jara's skin flickered with what might have been surprise at the topic shift. "The cascade failure, yes." You stayed on shift for 18 hours straight. Wouldn't leave until every backup system was online and stable. I brought you coffee at hour 14, and you barely noticed because you were too focused on making sure the residential quarters didn't turn into a sauna. Kale leaned against the workbench, warming to his subject. The station commander offered to rotate in another tech. You told her, and I quote, "Those families have children sleeping in there. I'm not leaving until I know they're safe." That was standard protocol, Jara said, but her voice had gone quieter. Standard protocol is 6-hour shifts with mandatory rest breaks. You worked triple that because you cared more about keeping people safe than following regulations. Kale picked up a wrench, turning it over in his hands just to have something to do. Ambassador Chen down there. She's beautiful according to human standards, symmetrical features, confident bearing, probably has a skincare routine that costs more than my monthly salary. But I've never seen her stay late to check on junior crew members after a difficult shift. Never seen her bring someone coffee just because she noticed they forgot to eat lunch. Never seen her fix something that wasn't her responsibility simply because it needed fixing and she knew how. Jara's ears had tilted forward, that unconscious gesture of focused attention. Her skin was cycling through lighter shades now, violet fading toward something almost lavender. You do those things, Kale continued. Last week, Ensign Park, new kid just out of training, made a mistake during a pressure seal replacement. Could have been bad. Could have gotten him fired. You stayed 3 hours after your shift helping him fix it, then walked him through the proper procedure twice more to make sure he understood. When he thanked you, you told him everyone makes mistakes and what matters is learning from them. He was frightened, Jara said softly. He needed guidance, not punishment. Exactly, that's hard. That's the thing that makes you radiant in a way that has nothing to do with bone structure or human beauty standards. Kale set down the wrench and met her eyes directly. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see someone who faces every challenge with steady courage, who treats people with kindness even when they don't deserve it, who makes this station better just by being here. That's beauty, Jara, real beauty, the kind that matters. The docking bay had gone quiet around them, the usual mechanical symphony reduced to background hum. Jara stood perfectly still, and Kale couldn't read her expression. Her skin had settled on a shade of violet blue that caught the overhead lights in ways that made her look like she was lit from within. I thought. Jara started, then stopped, started again. When you said two big things, I thought you were making a joke. The kind human males make, about physical attributes. Kale felt his face heat up again. Yeah, I realized that approximately half a second after the words left my mouth. I'm going to be thinking about that moment at 3 a.m. for the rest of my life, possibly longer if there's an afterlife. My eternal punishment will be reliving that sentence in loop. That startled a laugh out of her, actual, genuine laughter that sounded like bells underwater. Your species has very strange communication methods. Tell me about it. We're a disaster of mixed signals and accidental innuendo. It's a miracle we've achieved space travel without accidentally declaring war through poorly worded compliments. Kale managed a smile. But I meant what I said, about the courage and heart thing, not the other thing. Definitely not the other thing. I understand now. Jara's skin had lightened considerably, now a soft purple blue that Kale was fairly certain meant contentment or relief or possibly both. Though your explanation was circuitous. Circuitous is my middle name. Well, it's actually James, but Circuitous should be my middle name. Put it on my tombstone. Kale Circuitous Durant, he eventually got to the point. Jara made that sound again, the one that was definitely a laugh. Would you like to continue this conversation somewhere less? She gestured at Gerald, who leaked accusingly. Mechanical. The observation lounge, Kale suggested. It has the second worst coffee on the station, which by local standards makes it almost drinkable. Better than the docking bay coffee. The docking bay doesn't have coffee. It has a liquid that makes credible threats against your digestive system. Yes, Jara said, and her skin shifted again, brightening. That is what I said. Second worst coffee. They left Gerald to his hydraulic brooding and made their way through Outpost Vila's corridors, past crew members who nodded greetings and didn't seem to notice that Kale's entire nervous system was still recovering from the conversation. The observation lounge sat at the station's hub, offering a view of the surrounding space that almost made up for the aggressive mediocrity of everything else. Through the massive viewport, a nearby nebula painted the darkness in shades of amber and rose gold, dusk clouds catching the light of distant stars. Kale had spent more hours than he cared to admit staring at that view, usually while the station's various systems failed in creative new ways. The coffee dispenser in the corner eyed him with what he was certain was malevolence. He approached cautiously, selected 2 cups of something advertised as. Kale waited. He'd learned that Jara spoke the way she worked, methodically, carefully, each word placed with precision. Interrupting would only derail the process. On Vela, beauty is measured in efficiency, she continued, in precision, in the perfection of function. We do not have your human concept of aesthetic appeal divorced from purpose. When I first encountered human media, human art, human standards of beauty. She paused, her ears angling backward slightly. I realized you found each other beautiful for reasons I did not understand. Symmetry without function. Features that served no purpose beyond visual appeal. And I began to wonder if perhaps I was missing something. If perhaps your standards were more sophisticated than mine. Our standards are mostly determined by marketing executives trying to sell moisturizer, Kale said. I wouldn't call that sophisticated. But they mean something to your people. And when I work alongside humans, when I see how they look at each other, assess each other. Jara's skin darkened slightly. I became aware that by your metrics I am not beautiful. My proportions are wrong. My features are alien. My skin changes color in ways that probably seem unsettling. Your skin is amazing, Kale interrupted, then caught himself. Sorry, you were talking, I'll shut up. Jara glanced at him, something flickering across her face too quickly to identify. Amazing. It's like watching thought made visible. Humans spend fortunes on mood rings and color-changing jewelry trying to achieve a fraction of what you do naturally. Your emotions painted in light, he searched for the right word, beautiful, in a way humans can't replicate. Jara turned back to the viewport, but Kale could see her reflection smiling. They stood in silence for a while, drinking terrible coffee, and watching the nebula paint space in colors that didn't have names in any language Kale knew. Station sounds filtered through the observation lounge, the ever-present hum of life support, distant voices, the occasional clang of maintenance work. Gerald was probably still leaking somewhere, plotting revenge. When did it start? Kale asked finally, the comparing yourself to human standards thing. Jara was quiet long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then she sighed, a sound like wind through tall structures. 2 years ago, I was assigned to a joint research station, mixed crew, mostly human. There was a celebration, some human holiday about gratitude. Everyone dressed formally. The human women wore garments designed to enhance their features, to emphasize the characteristics your species finds appealing. Her hands tightened on her coffee cup. I wore my ceremonial robes, traditional Valier formal wear. One of the human males looked at me and said, "Interesting costume." Not unkindly, but the word costume, as if my culture's formal attire was dress-up, pretend. That guy was an idiot, Kale said flatly. Perhaps, but his comment made me aware of something I had not considered before, that I existed in spaces designed for human aesthetic sensibilities, that my appearance was judged by metrics created for a different species entirely. She took a sip of her coffee, made a face that suggested she regretted it. I began watching human media, trying to understand what made someone beautiful in your culture. The features, the proportions, the way beauty seemed to correlate with social value. Please tell me you didn't base your understanding of human beauty standards on entertainment media. I did. Oh no. Why oh no? Kale gestured helplessly with his coffee cup, nearly spilling motor oil on himself. Because entertainment media is designed to sell fantasy, not represent reality. They cast people who have won the genetic lottery, light them professionally, digitally enhance them, and then present that as normal. Actual humans don't look like that. I don't look like that. Nobody looks like that. It's false advertising for the species. Jara's ears tilted in that way that meant she was processing new information. But your entertainment media reflects your cultural values, what you find appealing. Our entertainment media reflects what marketing departments think will sell advertising space. There's a difference. Kale moved to sit on one of the lounge's uncomfortable benches, gesturing for Jara to join him. She did, folding her long frame with that impossible grace. Look, humans are weird about beauty. We have these standards that change every few decades based on random factors like which celebrities are popular, or what some fashion designer decided was trendy. 100 years ago, different features were considered ideal. 100 years from now, it'll change again. It's arbitrary nonsense. But it affects how humans treat each other, how they assign value. Yeah, Kale admitted, it does. Which is a fundamental flaw in our species that we really should work on. But the point is, and I'm getting to a point, I promise, the point is that beauty standards are mostly cultural noise. They're not objective truth. They're just preferences. Preferences shaped by biology and culture and advertising campaigns. Jara's skin had shifted to a contemplative shade of purple. You are saying I've been measuring myself against arbitrary metrics. I'm saying you've been measuring yourself against metrics designed for a completely different species. It's like. Kale searched for an analogy. It's like being upset that you can't fly because birds can. You're not built for flight. You're built for what you are, and what you are is pretty damn impressive. But I work alongside humans, in human spaces, by human standards. By human standards. You're exotic and striking, and honestly kind of intimidating in a way that's probably very attractive if you're into that. Kale caught himself. Not that I'm not saying I find you. What I mean is, objectively speaking from an aesthetic standpoint, you have a lot going for you, in a completely professional observation kind of way. He was going to die, right here in the observation lounge, killed by his own inability to form coherent sentences about appearance without sounding like a disaster. Jara was looking at him with an expression he absolutely could not parse. Her skin had gone very still, locked on a shade of violet blue that might have been surprise or might have been something else entirely. You find me attractive, she said. Not a question. A statement of observed fact. Kale's brain made a sound like a computer crashing. I find you competent and kind and brave, which I think is more important than conventional attractiveness. But also, yes, objectively, you're striking. In a professional colleague kind of way. That I'm noticing professionally, for professional reasons. You are terrible at this, Jara said, but she was definitely smiling now. I'm an engineer, I fix things. People are not things. They do not come with repair manuals or troubleshooting guides. This is not my area of expertise. Kale set down his coffee before he spilled it through sheer nervous energy. Look, what I'm trying to say, badly apparently, is that you've been comparing yourself to a standard that doesn't apply. Human beauty standards are for humans. You're failure. You should be measured by your own metrics. And by any reasonable metric that accounts for courage, competence, and kindness, you're exceptional. Jara was quiet for a long moment, her gaze returning to the nebula outside. When she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. On Vela, we have a saying, starlight needs no translation. It means that some things are universally understood regardless of species or culture. Beauty as function, as purpose, as the rightness of a thing being what it is meant to be. She paused. I had forgotten that saying. I had begun to think that perhaps starlight did need translation after all. That I needed to learn a new language of beauty to exist in human spaces. You don't, Kale said firmly. You just need to exist. The right people will see you clearly. The wrong people don't matter. And you see me clearly. I see you as someone who makes broken stations run, who cares about people, who stays late to help scared kids learn their jobs, who brings me tools I forget because you've learned my patterns. I see you as someone who makes things better just by being present. That's clear enough for me. Jara's skin brightened, shifting through shades toward something almost luminous. Thank you, Kale Durant, for the honesty. And for the terrible compliments that eventually became good ones. My specialty, terrible compliments with eventual redemption arcs. She laughed, and the sound filled the observation lounge like music. The nebula outside continued its patient burn, indifferent to human anxiety and Valier insecurity and the small dramas of frontier stations. Kale and Jara sat in companionable silence, their terrible coffee forgotten, just existing in a moment that felt significant in ways Kale couldn't quite articulate. Finally, Jara spoke again. Will you tell me something honestly, without deflection or humor? I can try, no promises on success. Do you truly think courage and heart are forms of beauty? Kale considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. Yeah, I do. Physical appearance is just presentation. It's the wrapping. What you do, how you treat people, the choices you make when things are difficult, that's the actual content. And your content is exceptional. He gestured vaguely at her. The presentation is also good for the record, but the content is what matters. Humans are strange, Jara said, but her tone was fond. You claim to value appearance, but then say appearance doesn't matter. We're a contradictory species. We contain multitudes, mostly of confusion and poor decision-making. Kale managed a smile. But if it helps, I think you're beautiful by any standard. Human, Valier, or otherwise, you're distinctive. You're yourself. There's nobody else like you. That's rarer and more valuable than fitting some template. Jara's skin had gone fully luminous now, bright violet blue that seemed to capture the nebula's light and reflect it back. You have a gift for sincerity hidden beneath layers of deflection. That's going on my performance review. Occasionally sincere when cornered. I am glad I told you about the insecurity. She turned to face him fully. I have been carrying it for years, letting it affect how I see myself, how I interact with humans. It feels lighter now. Acknowledged. Insecurity is like that. It grows in darkness. Sometimes just saying it out loud makes it smaller. Kale stood, stretching muscles that had been tense for longer than he'd realized. For what it's worth, you make this station better. You make the people here better. That includes me. So thank you. For what? For being exactly who you are. For not trying to fit a template. For showing up and doing the work and caring about people even when it's difficult. He smiled. And for bringing me tools I forget. That's also important. Jara stood as well, towering over him in the way that would probably never stop being slightly intimidating. I will continue bringing tools. Someone must prevent Gerald from claiming victory. Gerald must never win. It's a matter of principle. They made their way back through the station, returning to their respective duties. But something had shifted between them. A ease that hadn't existed before, a understanding that needed no translation. Kale returned to fighting Gerald's hydraulic rebellion. Jara resumed her diagnostic work. They existed in parallel, occasionally passing tools, occasionally exchanging dry observations about machinery and life support systems, and the general chaos of frontier stations. The diplomatic delegation departed 3 days later. Ambassador Chen and her entourage filed through the docking bay with the same calculated precision they'd arrived with. This time when they passed the engineering workstation, Jara's skin stayed its natural violet blue. She didn't watch them with that expression of melancholy. She just kept working, focused on her task, comfortable in her own skin in ways that seemed new. Kale noticed, didn't comment, just passed her the tool she needed before she had to ask for it. Word spread through Outpost Vila the way stories always spread through closed environments, through overheard conversations and second-hand accounts, and the kind of embellishment that comes from boredom and limited entertainment options. The details changed with each telling, but the core remained. The human engineer who'd reminded an alien colleague that beauty needs no translation. It became a quiet legend among the station's non-human crew, a reminder that their value wasn't measured by human metrics, that their differences were strengths rather than deficiencies. Cale heard versions of the story that bore only passing resemblance to what actually happened, but he didn't correct them. The truth was less important than what people needed to hear. Ensign Park, the young tech Jara had helped, started checking in on other junior crew members, offering guidance instead of judgment. A Krell engineer began wearing traditional jewelry again, pieces she'd hidden away because they didn't match human aesthetic sensibilities. Small changes, rippling outward. 6 months later, Cale was once again fighting with Gerald, who had apparently decided to leak from entirely new locations just to keep things interesting. Jara appeared beside him with tools and terrible coffee, and that comfortable silence they'd perfected. "I heard Ensign Park helped one of the new arrivals today," she said, running diagnostics while Cale cursed at stubborn bolts. "Stayed late to walk them through the pressure seal procedures." "You're a good influence," Cale said, "creating a culture of actual helpfulness, very dangerous for station morale." Station morale was already questionable. Fair point. They worked in easy rhythm, comfortable in ways that had nothing to do with words. At one point, Jara's hand brushed his while reaching for a tool, and her skin flickered briefly to a shade Cale had learned meant contentment. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for that night, for the honesty. Thank you for trusting me with it. You gave me something valuable, perspective I had lost." "You gave me something valuable too," Cale said, tightening a bolt that Gerald was fighting him on. "You reminded me that sincerity matters more than smooth delivery. That sometimes the terribly delivered truth is more important than the perfectly delivered lie." That is very philosophical for someone currently wrestling with hydraulics. Gerald brings out my contemplative side. Also my creative profanity, but we're focusing on the contemplative part. Jara laughed, and the sound filled the docking bay. Her skin shifted through shades of violet blue, luminous and distinctive and entirely herself. Beautiful in ways that needed no translation, required no comparison, demanded no template. Just Jara, being exactly who she was meant to be, and Cale working beside her, occasionally passing tools and making terrible jokes and thinking that frontier stations weren't so bad when you had the right people to share them with. Gerald leaked accusingly, but even Gerald couldn't diminish the moment. Outside the viewport, stars wheeled past in ancient patterns, indifferent to beauty standards and cultural metrics, and the small victories of people learning to see themselves clearly. The nebula burned on, painting space in colors that belonged to no single species, beautiful to anyone who bothered to look. Somewhere in the observation lounge, a coffee dispenser plotted revenge against Cale's taste buds. On the command deck, Ambassador Torrance's successor argued with Station Command about resource allocation. In the residential sectors, families slept safely because engineers like Jara stayed late to keep systems running. And in Docking Bay 3, 2 people worked side by side, comfortable in silence, secure in the knowledge that some truths transcend species lines. Courage and heart. The 2 big things that matter most. The rest is just wrapping.